You remember how I used to tell you that some nights on post were so quiet I could hear the sap run in the pines? Michigan did that to me, taught me there's a difference between quiet and silence. Quiet is what you get after taps, when the last generator coughs and the MPs do their slow loop. Silence is what a predator makes when it wants you to think you're alone. My name's Sam Smith. Yeah, I know, the most forgettable name to hang a story on. Staff Sergeant, 11B, with a couple of deployments behind me. Born and raised in South LA, Mom still calls me every Sunday and asks if I'm eating vegetables. My little sister sends pictures of her kids like she's trying to win a contest. I hunt when I can, archery mostly, because it teaches you breeding, a second kind of patience. And I've got just enough salt in my hair now that the new guys call me top, even though I'm not. I'm telling you this because what happened last summer at Grayling wasn't a movie, and it wasn't one of those gas station stories that grow a new ending every time you tell it. It was quiet work that tipped into silence, and if I don't lay it out like a person, live through it, you file it away with the campfire stuff you listen to on your long drives and forget. I don't want you to forget. You know Camp Grayling, right? Biggest National Guard training base in the country. Rolling forests and lakes that look carved out by the knuckles of God. Pine and oak, and swamp that holds sound like a secret. They sent a small detachment of us up there in late July. Clouds flattened the sky like pressed wool and never quite broke. The kind of Michigan summer where the heat is mostly in your clothes and the air is wet to the touch. Officially, we were there for a night security augmentation and logistics evaluation. Unofficially, there was a fenced-off annex just south of Range 30, where the badges were different and the questions were fewer. I've heard words like bipedal canid before, not in the ways you read them online, with blurry photos and arrows drawn on screenshots. I saw them in a binder once, blacked out sentences that still managed to carry meaning around the redactions. That was at a different base. We were told in that briefing that the binder didn't exist and that the animal in the thermal footage was misinterpreted. But the way the colonel kept rubbing the bridge on his nose told me somebody had needed a word for a thing that didn't fit the words we had, and bipedal canid was what they landed on because it was clinical and ugly and made everyone in the room sleep better. So when First Lieutenant Morales pulled us into a tent the first night and told us hands off the annex, stay off the lodging roads after midnight, and that if we heard howling, we were to report it and not to post videos on Instagram, I looked at Specialist Haugen and Corporal Diaz, and we didn't smile. Night shift, H-hour was don't get cute, and the weather had settled into its cotton gray that swallowed distance. I had my M4, of course with the usual glass. Diaz kept the M240 like it was a baby he'd promised his mama to protect. Haugen ran the radio and the 12 gauge because she said she liked how honest it was. We had a medic attached for the exercise, Doc Patel, who had the pinched wide awake look of a man who'd made friends with coffee and regretted it. And then there was Halvorsen from Minnesota, who said nothing and sharpened his pocket knife in a way that sounded like a metronome for bad decisions. We checked cameras, standard motion sensor rings along the wire, thermal and low light. The annex had its own array of toys we weren't supposed to see, and mostly we didn't. Except you can't stand 10 feet from a building that hums like a chest freezer and pretend you didn't notice on purpose. I kept telling myself the hum sounded like air conditioning, even though the air was already the kind of warm that sticks your undershirt to your back and calls itself your second skin. At 23:12, the first sound came. We were on the south perimeter, near a shallow dip that ran like a forgotten creek bed. The grass there was knee-high, seeded with blue stem and things I don't know names for. The wind moved it in long strokes. But that night, the air barely stirred, and the grass did something wind doesn't make to it. It lay down in a path 5 yards wide, as if something heavy and cautious thought the best way to be invisible was to press itself against the world until the world allowed a passage. "Boar?" Diaz said, though that was a question and a wish. "Boars don't lie down grass in lanes," I said. "They plow." Different thing. Haugen touched her finger to her earpiece. Motion on south too. Camera picks up heat, then loses it, like it went behind the screen. We put our own eyes on it. Without thermal, you trust your ears in the way the night tastes. The clouds hung low enough to make the night near, and the woods just beyond that. The smell was cedar, motor oil, damp earth. Then something else crept in, like a coin laid on your tongue. Copper and dog. I don't know if you've ever smelled dog when dog isn't there. It's not funk, it's not wet. It's the warmth of a coat that spent its days in the sun and come back to you with stories. This wasn't that. This was the idea of a dog, a cologne designed by a predator. "Hold," Morales said on the net. He was back on the TOC, watching multiple screens dance. "Let's not light up the county for a deer." "Not a deer," Haugen said, calm enough to make it worse. Then the howl. "There are wolves in the UP, Upper Peninsula. There aren't wolves in that part of Grayling. That's what the sign said, what the rangers will tell you, what the studies agree on." This howl didn't care for studies. It started low and then climbed a scale that made the hair on my arm stiffen under my sleeves. It found a note that felt like the metal in the fence around the annex. Then it broke in two, like something had harmonized with itself. In training, we talk about morale and its inverse. What it felt like then was the leader of a group telling the group what to think about us. It wasn't just noise, it was a brief. Haugen looked up and I saw her mouth form two words without saying them. "There's more." At 23:30, they tested the fence. Not ours, the annexes. Whatever they had in there, it mattered. 3 soft thumps along the northern wall in a staggered line, like something leaning its shoulder to a door to see if it had ripened enough to open. Then a moment of nothing, as if they were counting. Then a 4th thump, higher, and the fence did a sound like a swallowed gasp as tension moved through it. We weren't supposed to be near that fence, so we weren't officially. Unofficially, we moved in a way you move when your commanding officer hasn't told you but the situation has, which is to say carefully and in pairs. I took Diaz and the 240. We got within sight lines, and I saw what I expected and didn't. There were eyes, not glowing like in the movies. Light reflects off the tapetum lucidum and does what it does, sure, but this wasn't a camera trick. This was shine like you get off river water at night when the moon is hiding and the clouds forget to be helpful. It's how you know the river is there even when it should be just black, something moving slower than dark, looking back. 1, then 2, then 5. The height was wrong for wolves, too high. The spacing was wrong for coyotes, too far apart. I could see the shoulders that weren't on 4s. And something in me that still wants to find rational shapes got busy listing animals that had stood when they shouldn't. Bear? The weight was wrong. Moose? The shape was wrong. Men in ghillie suits? The sound was wrong. I didn't call it DOGMAN. Not then. I'd seen those words with the redactions and I'd allowed them to move around in my head like furniture you didn't know where to place. But saying them out loud on a line would have made something formal that we were not ready to marry. At 23:42, whoever ran the annex decided containment should be a verb instead of a noun. You can tell when people in buildings pull levers because the world outside takes on the mood of their decision. Floodlights came up, so bright and sudden that trees seemed guilty, white brightness that erased shadows, and in that moment the night creatures froze. I counted 7, Diaz mounted 8. We can argue it later. They were big in the way good linebackers are big, cobbled across the shoulders, not bodybuilder showy but the kind of strength that knows work. And they stood. They didn't rise, standing was already their language. Their snouts, snouts, not noses, lifted as if the lights had a smell they recognized, and their ears swiveled like radar. Not like in a movie where they scatter like marbles and you get to breathe and say false alarm and laugh because it wasn't funny. They left like they had decided this wasn't about us yet, as if the fence was a conversation they'd return to once they'd rehearsed their lines. It was deliberate. It was a promise. We held the line until 0300. We drank coffee that tasted like old pennies and starch. Morales came out from the TOC and leaned his forearms on the hood of the Humvee and did a small thing that meant a lot. He took his helmet off, rubbed his scalp and put it back on. It's a gesture you make when you almost say a thing and then don't. You ever read the Manistee reports? He asked me when we weren't on net. I thought of the binder, the way the shape of something can survive even when you paint it black. Bits, I said. Training nonsense. Internet nonsense. I shrugged. Yeah, he said, which isn't agreement so much as a place to put the heavy end of a sentence. Stay tight. I slept in the morning and dreamt of fences. My phone buzzed at 0911, and it was my mom's Sunday voice memo from LA, which she had recorded Friday because she knows my Sundays aren't my own. She told me about Caldo de Polo and the neighbor's cat that keeps sunning itself on the hood of her Corolla. You can't do anything about the world, she said, like she always says, but you can do something about yourself. I wanted to tell her that sometimes the world shows up to talk about itself, whether you want to hear it or not. That afternoon, I walked the edge of a wetland with Haugen. The clouds piled like wet laundry. You can track in wet grass like you can track in snow. If you kneel and look, the world will show you where it got pressed down in the night and what pressed it, and even what direction the pressure walked when it forgot to be careful. I tell you this as a hunter and as a man who knows what his boot looks like from underneath. The prints weren't boots, and they weren't bare feet, and they weren't paws either. Not exactly. They were an argument between those things. 4 impressions. Yes, but the 2 rear, longer the front two wider. Pads that could widen when weight dropped onto them. When a thing walks on fours, the front prints carry the grace and the back prints carry the work. When it stands, the work sits up and looks at you. At dusk, a truck rolled into the annex. Boxy, matte, nondescript in that expensive way. Two men in civvies got out with badges on lanyards that gave them permission to not care what our badges said. They went into the humming building and came out with the sort of faces that hadn't expected to meet the day they met. "They've got something in there," Haugen said, not whispering like we did earlier. We were past that. And those things last night, they were checking to see if we were serious. "What's the play?" Diaz asked. "The play is, we are told nothing and we do our jobs," I said, "because that's what my rank says, even when every other part of me wants to go kick down a door and ask to see the monster." The hunter in me was awake and pacing. At 21:17, the power failed. It wasn't a full blackout. Our grid holds redundancies like a grandmother holds recipes. But the annex lost its juice for exactly 4 seconds. How do I know it was 4 seconds? Because every machine in our bubble restarted with the kind of beeps and chirps that tell a man who spent his life around radios and routers that there are clocks inside everything that always remember when they've been asked to step away. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3. Nurse those seconds and you will learn what can slip through them when you're not looking. The fence alarm chirped, then it didn't chirp anymore. We were already moving when the howl came again. It was closer, and this time, the second note, the harmony, didn't come from the same throat. It came from many, stacked and staggered, a chorus building itself inside our bones. They had rehearsed, they had decided it was time to speak. Morales' voice went flat on the net, the way it does when he needs his voice to carry distance. South and East teams shift to annex perimeter, North team hold, light discipline until we say, Doc Patel, reserve at TOC, Halvorsen with me. We've drilled for breaches until our boots could do it without us attached. This wasn't a man with bolt cutters and a met problem. This was the unkind cousin of a thunderstorm, trying on our fence like a coat he'd found on a hanger and wanted to see if it made him look dangerous. The first of them was already halfway through when we got eyes on. The fence had been opened, not torn like you'd think, not tossed aside like an insult. The links were peeled back like a can lid, neat and decisive. Something sharp had done that, something that knew patience. The creature, I have to choose a word so I'll say it, DOGMAN, was part way in, one hand, yes, hand, 5 long fingers ending in nail-like knives on the frame, the other palm flat on the ground, like it was taking a breath. Its head turned toward us, and it saw more than a heat signature. It saw decisions, and what it showed back wasn't animal panic. It was calculation, the subtractions of possibility from time. Fire, Morales said, and for the first time that night, the world sounded like a place I recognized. Rifles and machine guns, and the bark of the 12 gauge. The DOGMAN moved like a dancer who'd been told to move like water. It took the round I sent, center mass, iron chest, and it rocked and it hated it, but it didn't stop being itself. 2 more moved through the gap behind the first, smaller or maybe younger, or maybe just lighter. And the way they placed themselves told me something I didn't want to know. One was guarding, one was reaching, and one was watching us watch them. Eyes left, Diaz roared, and the floodlights we'd used like a crutch saved us and betrayed us all at once. Somebody snapped one with an impact I felt in my teeth, and the dark came back in wedges, moving across the annex yard like curtain closing on a stage. That's when I heard it from inside the building. It wasn't a scream. I've heard animals die and I know the economy of their last sounds. This was a voice that hadn't been allowed to be a voice for a while. A sound that had learned to be quiet and then remembered it didn't have to be. Pain and command, not English, not words, but the grammar was the same we use when we call for our people. You hear that? Haugen said over the noise, not really asking. They're not attacking for fun, I said. They're breaking someone out. Alpha, Halvorsen said, the first word I'd heard him volunteer all week. He said it like he was noticing weather. We pushed. We weren't going to hold them at the fence. The breach widened like an idea nobody could argue with. I told Diaz to anchor right, and he did, raining belt-fed reminders into the gaps and making some of those reminders stick. I saw one of the smaller ones bleed, a dark splash across the concrete that looked black even under the lights, and it made a noise that would have been a whine in a world that believed these things were dogs. It wasn't a whine here, it was a promise instead. Haugen, on me, Morales snapped, and we took the corner of the building, the air around the door cycling through temperatures as if the building couldn't settle on a story. Cold draft, then warm breath, then the weird sucked out feeling of a negative pressure room. Somebody had engineered rooms inside with ideas about air. The door fought us like a door fights when it doesn't want to be on our side. We put it on our side anyway. Inside, it smelled like bleach tried to hide something and failed. I've been in labs and I've been in barns, and this was a grudge match between the two. There were kennels that weren't called kennels, cages that weren't called cages, and those curtains on rails like you get in an ER. Two technicians in paper suits huddled behind a steel table that had bolts in the floor. Big bolts, the kind you use when you're not sure what you're bolting down will respect bolts. We moved like we'd trained for it, and like we hadn't. You can't train for certain shapes. There was broken glass, and the negative pressure hissed again, and beyond it, in a chamber they'd engineered to be clever. Something big had decided the cleverness was over. The thick window that would have been bullet resistant in a sane world was spider-webbed with the starbursts. Through the white network of fractures, a face watched us. You want me to describe it, and I will, but I'll tell you this. The most wrong part wasn't the growl, or the teeth, or the eyes. It was the familiarity. A little coyote intelligence, a little gorilla forearm, a little man behind the eyes. It was grey along the muzzle, which shouldn't surprise us. Alphas get old too, and scars not arranged by accidents. Fur matted where fur needed to be fur, but skin where fur had rubbed away under restraints. Ears torn and healed. It put one hand on the cracked glass and pushed, and I heard a sound that makes engineers quit their jobs. Glass surrendering to insistence. Don't shoot the glass, Morales said, because we might have been dumb enough to try. Back, back. And then, behind us, more howls. The pack had come inside the fence. We could hold doors for a while, but not forever. It was time to choose what we meant to do in this story. Sergeant, Haugen said, not a question. She was asking if I understood what this was. They're not here for us, I said. They'll kill us to get what they want, but they're not here for us. Then we give them what they want, she said, and Doc Patel, who had come up behind us, nodded without liking that he was nodding. I saw in his face what he was imagining, surgery in reverse. Morales looked from the cracked glass to the doorway where Halvorsen was already repelling a desperate shape that thought it could fit more than it could. There was a sentence in his jaw that was all rank and no person, and for a second I hated him because I knew what that sentence required. "Do it," he said. We found the controls. It wasn't hard once you decided to stop pretending we were not in a place where controls existed. The panel had labels in the kind of professional language that says a lot without meaning anything. Containment lock override, atmosphere rebalance, restraint null. We could do a thing and let the world do the rest. I hit containment lock override and the room side, restraint null, and the bolts in the floor became just decorative decisions. The window groaned and then gave up a corner with a crack that ran like lightning. The Alpha put its shoulders into it and was through the way something is true when you're not going to stop it without killing it. Let me be clear, I thought it would look at us like we'd done it a favor. It didn't. It looked at us like we were part of the room, and the room had hurt it, and it had a budget for pain. It came at us. Everything in me wanted to believe in stories where gestures matter, where you do the right thing and something with teeth recognizes it and nods and goes away. It didn't. It took 2 steps like it had been born in steps, and then it was on us. Morales opened up full auto, bark that made the air judder, and the Alpha accepted 3, 5, 7 rounds like gifts that insulted it. It swept an arm, and that arm was not a paw. Morales went into a table, and the table went into a wall, and the wall dented. Halvorsen put his knife into a place people don't put knives on animals, and found out knives, too, had to negotiate their place in this story. He got thrown into the curtain rails and took them down in a choking hiss of plastic. I'm not ashamed to say I was scared. I moved away. Fear is a loyal friend when you remember who owns who. I put 2 into its knee because joints are joints, whether the thing is a myth or not, and I heard it hate that. It swayed and turned and showed me teeth, and I've seen bad dental nights, but these told me they were tools before they were decorations. It was close enough that I could smell its breath, and I'll spend the rest of my life hoping to never smell that again. It was rank and old and chemical and meat. "Light," Haugen shouted, and I didn't know why until she fired a flare straight into its face from her 12 gauge. Not shot flare. The small room did not appreciate that choice. White hell blossomed, and even a thing that hunts by smell and sound does not enjoy having a star go off at nose range. It reeled and did the kind of movement that isn't thinking, and it plastered the last of the glass downward at us and over us, and then it was in the hole, and then out into the night again, where its people were. We fell back into the lab's main corridor, dazed and blinking and laughing, that kind of laughter you laugh when the wheel of the world misses your face by a finger's width. Morales coughed, winced, got up, tried to get up again when the first try didn't take, and waved us like an orchestra. Let's move, let's move, let's move. We moved out into the yard again, where the floodlights stuttered and tried to decide if they were alive. The noise had shifted. It wasn't breach noise anymore. It was something like relief and anger and instruction in a language we can't diagram. I saw silhouettes on the far fence, limped in a half light, and pack moving with a direction it hadn't had 10 minutes before. The gap widened and closed with bodies, and then there was distance, and then we were just people again in a place with fences and the sky and the moon trying to find a way through clouds. You're going to ask, did they kill people? Yes, I'm not going to grandstand and give you a number. 2 of ours didn't go home. The names don't help the story be truer, and I'm not authorized to say them, and also I don't want to say them. The annex people, civvies with badges, lost one of their own to a bad door choice. Those things were surgical with anger when anger made sense, and careless with it when it didn't. They crippled cameras better than teenagers with paintball guns. They tore the guts out of 2 trucks like they were candy wrappers. They avoided the places where the ground vibrated in a way they didn't like, which is my way of saying the generator footprint made them uneasy, and if I had more time, I'd learn why. The second encounter, the one after we freed the Alpha, came at 02:19, when most of the shooting had turned into tense waiting again, and most of us had allowed the part of our minds that counts minutes to stand up and stretch. It came from the west, from the tree line, where a logging road had made a new kind of quiet. I was on that line with Diaz and Doc, and a private named Kellerman, who still had the waxy look of a boy who hasn't done his first stupid thing yet. The thing that came wasn't the Alpha. It was a big one, sure, but there was a meanness to it that was more personal than political. It didn't use cover. It didn't do the perimeter dance. It came straight, fast, on 4s, and then 2, and then 4s again, like it was trying our gates to see which it liked best. And when it hit the wire, it didn't test it or peel it. It went through it, like wire was a rumor. It chose us because I know it saw me put rounds into the Alpha's knee, and maybe I'm giving myself too much credit, but that's the story I have to live with. Predators remember, veterans do too. It went for me. I know because I had time to know. There is a sliver of stillness in every bad second. It stood up in mine and took a breath, and then it was a wall, and that wall had muscle, and it hit me hard enough to make the world lose its focus. I went down and the world disagreed with my ribs. It brought its head down and the teeth tried to write my name in my shoulder. Diaz saved me. I want that on a plaque somewhere, even if no plaque ever sits on a wall. He went to full cyclic on the 240 right into its profile, and the profile learned about momentum and concrete. It flinched and turned and met a new algebra. The bullet didn't kill it. They changed its mind. It racked me with a hand in passing a polite swipe that left its politics on my armor, and it went at Diaz, like Diaz had offended somebody's god. Doc was small and fast and brave in that way medics are, where they don't think about the story they'll tell later. He threw a lit road flare at its feet like he was tossing a treat. The bright and the heat did that thing again. You learn fast, and so do they. It stepped back and I put one into its hip because that's a hinge and hinges don't like attention. It hated that in a way I felt in my sternum. It swung for my head and I met it with the butt of my weapon. And you know how in movies that works. In real life it works too, sometimes. If you mean it and if your guardian angels had coffee. Kellerman, God bless him, did his stupid thing and made it smart. He'd been handed a shotgun and mostly pointed it at his own feet all night, but he found the courage to step into the same world the rest of us were in. He put a slug into the thing's chest and the chest didn't like that. Then his second round went wide because sometimes your hands are too human, and then Diaz found his sweet spot and walked the fire up the creature's side, and the creature's fur, burned at the edges now where the flare had kissed it, made a sound I haven't heard before or since. Not rage, not fear, surprise. It had built a church in its head where it didn't get hurt, and we'd walked into that church in muddy boots. It left us alive. We didn't win so much as convince it the cost wasn't worth the story it wanted to tell. It backed, fast, low, and then disappeared into the trees, the way you turn a page on a book you didn't write. We tracked it as far as we dared, which was 20 yards, and an excuse. By dawn the clouds decided they were tired of being scolded by wind. They tore just enough for a square of sky to ambush us with color, and the pine tips got a shine that made them look awake after a long night. The annex was shut, not boarded, not abandoned, just made quieter than even silence needed. The civies packed a truck that didn't look like it could hold what they were packing. The fence got new pieces and a new speech about duty hung in the air like a flag that had forgotten its pole. They told us to say there'd been a disturbance, wildlife, possibly a rabbit. The official report will read like a stutter. You already know that. What I haven't told you is why I think they came. Why that first night was a test and the second was a break-in and a fight that had nothing to do with us until it did. Dogs love their own. Wolves do too. You can call those things whatever makes you feel safest, but the behavior was a family story told with teeth. The alpha was inside. We were the walls of the story the other ones wanted to change. They did what anyone would do when their leader, father, mother, whatever word fits best on a mouth shaped like that, is taken. They found who had done the taking and they took it back. We helped, not because we were heroes, because we were stuck in a moral cul-de-sac, and the only way out was through. We freed something dangerous, and it bit us for the trouble because that's what dangerous things do. And still, if you ask me in the clean light of morning if I'd make the same choice, I'd say yes, because soldiers know there are worse things than being hurt for doing a thing you can stand by. They rotated us out a week later, long drives, phone calls to wives and moms from parking lots where the bars on your screen change like modes. I went home to LA for 72 hours and sat on mom's porch and let the neighbor's cat rub its face on my boot while my little sister told me about first grade and teeth that had fallen out and how the tooth fairy probably owed interest. I didn't sleep much. When I did, sometimes I dreamt of that lab and the star of a flare going off in a face that was older than the rules. Sometimes I dreamt of Michigan pines turning their heads towards something, walking on two legs that should have been four, and of quiet and silence arguing about whose turn it was. I didn't tell my family the truth. I told them a deer had spooked into the wire and we spent the night moving cars and calming people down. I said we saw a bear at a distance and it looked bigger than it was because distance is a liar. I said the stars were pretty when the clouds went on break. Mom said, you can't do anything about the world, but you can do something about yourself. And I kissed the top of her head and said, okay, if you want a moral, here's what I've got. Out there, the world has rooms inside it you haven't been in. Some rooms look like labs. Some rooms look like pine corridors and logging roads and fence lines where the grass lies down for things you don't have words for. We tried to lock one of those rooms and found out we weren't the landlords. The renters had keys we didn't know about, and family who'd come to collect. You'll ask me if bullets worked. Some did. You'll ask if silver would have worked, because movies and stories and hunting talk over beer. Maybe. I didn't have any. We had training and flares and each other, and that turned out to be enough to stay breathing, which feels like a victory when the night wants other things. You'll ask me if it's over. No. There are reports somewhere with redactions in them that look like they're talking around a name they don't want to say. There are roads in Grayling that lead to annexes that hum quieter now, and guards who have learned to listen for a different kind of silence. There are packs in woods who know we have fences, and who know what fences mean and don't, and an old creature in a stand of pines somewhere, with scars we helped it keep, telling a family the story of a night when it was inside and then it wasn't, and how the flicker of a man's lights made their eyes water for a while. Why am I telling you? Because you asked what I do on these long nights when I text you boring, and a little thumbs up emoji, and because you're one of the few people I know who don't turn this into a party trick. It happened, it's happening, somewhere to someone, and when I think about going back, because they'll send me back somewhere eventually, I don't think about monsters first. I think about packages from home and the way my bolts sound on gravel, and the way Nugan's laugh made the dark less sure of itself, and the movement in the tall grass that night when the air learned a new smell, and called it by a name we didn't want to say. So here it is, a true thing shaped like a story. Keep it how you keep photographs in a drawer, flat and out of the light, until you need to remember the faces inside. And if you ever find yourself on a road in northern Michigan, at night, and the pines are a black wall, and the sky is a wool blanket, and the radio in your dash loses a station for exactly 4 seconds, don't wait to hear what comes next. Turn around, respect the fences, and listen for the difference between quiet and silence.